All right, welcome to another show, Research to Reps Roundtable. I am your host, co-host, Dr. Pat Ivey, and with me is Dr. Ted Lambrinides and new co-host, Dr. Ernie Reimer. I'm excited to see how this goes. I'm really excited to see how this goes. Our guest is Eric McMahon with the NSCA. So without further ado, Eric, how's it going?
Going great. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate you doing this.
Ted, how's it going?
Doing great. Looking forward to today's podcast.
Awesome. Dr. Reimer, what's happening?
I'm just excited to be able to join this podcast as a co-host. The last time we talked, I was sitting on my patio in Salt Lake City. Now I'm sitting in my basement office in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm just really excited to break it down with Eric.
Exactly.
We got to get some books on those shelves, Ernie.
I know it's pretty vacant back there. You need a lamp or something.
Furniture just arrived. We've been waiting for months.
He just took the stickers and tags off. So let's get right into it. Eric, what are you doing now? What is happening? What is going on in your world? What can we take to our listeners?
Yeah, so Eric McMahon, I'm the coaching and sports science program manager for the NSCA. And I think one of the big things that I've been talking about a lot this past year is the Essentials of Sports Science textbook and the new NSCA certification for sports scientists. It's been something the NSCA has been working on since back in 2018, when a group of experts in the field came together and just established the need for this, and turned into a great textbook that launched in February. And we are right on the verge of launching. The exam applications are open. We already have about 100 applicants for this exam to sit for it. And so this is the one NSCA exam where you actually need to get your application approved based on your academic experience and your professional experience before you sit for the test. So we've built those processes. Everything's going really well. And we're just getting to the point where we can launch the actual test at the test centers. And those communications will be coming out really soon. We've been really pushing for 2021 to get it out the door. And I think it's going to be really something great that helps the field move forward.
So Eric, for let's say you have a young student that's just, listening to the podcast, go into a little bit more detail in terms of the actual content of the book as well as the certification.
For sure. So, I think it's one thing, you say, hey, what's a sports scientist, or what is sports science? And we could spend the whole podcast just going over definitions or how each of us might define that. And that's really part of the exercise here. But I think one thing that brought together this program is that there are different kinds of sports scientists, and there are different areas of the field represented under this sports science umbrella. And so the NSCA really had to broaden the scope of how we would, we might typically look at strength coaches or personal trainers. Well, it really goes beyond that to people that may be outside our typical audiences. There's going to be physical therapists, athletic trainers, dietitians, mental skills. All these skills tie into the sports science process. I think your department at Louisville really speaks to that, all the different areas that are represented. And so I see it, just coming out of the professional baseball world where I worked for about 15 years, I see it as a pathway of advancement from, if you're an analytical minded strength coach, if you are an analytical minded athletic trainer or physical therapist, or you have really, I think in these roles, we get pushed to the edge of our scope of practice a lot because we care so much and we serve our players, where now there's something you can aspire towards, not to say beyond the head strength coach, but a different role or a different opportunity that maybe wasn't there before. And we're starting to see these analytics roles, director of performance roles, senior director roles So I see it not only for, the highly technical, dedicated sports scientists, but I see value in this for leadership positions, overseeing departments where you might have sports scientists and strength and conditioning and athletic training working for you. But it's really a deeper dive into the scientific processes of training. And that's, I think, you could say, yeah, you go into the essentials of the strength and conditioning book, and those scientific processes are there, but it's a quick jump to application and coaching. And then we get into that coach speak that's what we use in the weight room a lot. A lot of coaches out there have master's degrees, have advanced degrees, have experience with research, and maybe haven't needed to apply it as much over the past decades or number of years. But the jobs now are requiring a little higher, a little more, a deeper look into that. And so this, the content in the book really just takes that next step forward and bridges the gap to those scientific processes, so that understanding is universal across disciplines. And so I think it's something for, if you're just a student in the field, it's not the first maybe certification you get, but the education is going to trickle down into each subdiscipline, into each area, and it's going to take us forward. So that's the way I see this program.
That's a lot to take in right there, Eric. And you said something at the very beginning with the application process for the CPSS, that it's a little bit more granular in that you actually have to be approved in order to take the exam. How do you feel that is going to benefit the overall field? And maybe reflect on that in light of like what's going to happen with the CSCS in the coming years?
It's a great question. So one thing coming into a role at the NSCA, I've had to learn a lot about accreditation and certification and just those industries and processes. And there's a lot that goes into that maybe we don't always think about in the coaching profession. The application process is something that's not, the other organizations do have applications to sit for it. There's also the concept of educational accreditation that we're working towards for our CSCS. So that'd be, you go to an accredited degree program, and that allows you to sit for the certification or licensure exam. So we see that in the medical field quite a bit. One thing, going back to that 2018 SME expert meeting of sports scientists, the two things they saw as most valuable above everything else was higher education and experience in the field. I think, I can say from the RSCC program, vetting experience is really challenging to do, because, if we all look at the same resume, we might see different things, right? And we see that in hiring all the time. So that's been probably the biggest challenge of incorporating all these disciplines that we need to include, but also checking to make sure that all the different types of experience that exist are represented by this program that need to be. And so I feel like we haven't been surprised by any questions coming in. I'm pretty confident with the process, and that we've done a lot of research at the academic program level, at the industry level, looking at athletic training, physical therapy, all of these common core fields that could be feeders for this program, and even the international equivalents, ESSA and BASES, we're talking about Australia and the UK, which really gave us a precedent to build on. So I think this program it's different than the CSCS in that it is so broad. But one thing I am really excited about on the CSCS front is educational accreditation and what that can do for the profession, just by taking us one step further. And I think we've always had those conversations. And I remember, Pat, when I had you on the podcast, we were talking about, what makes a good strength coach. And there's so many different thoughts and opinions out there.
Yeah. Eric, as you were talking, I had a question pop up in my head. How did we get here that the science is the last piece added to the pie or the puzzle? Like, how did we get to that point that, and I'm not talking about NSCA, I'm talking about in society, where we are, culturally. How did we get to the point? And it's like this in a lot of organizations and in schools, you have these other services, these other support services in place. But in my opinion, the foundation of them all is science. How is science the last piece added? And there may be some other pieces that are going to continue to be added, but how is science one of the last pieces here?
That's a great question. And it's going to be, I think there's a lot of ways to answer it. What popped into my head first was, internationally, sports science might be more established than strength and conditioning as a field, in the way we look at it. And maybe a lot of that is the fact that we have college sports programs here, and so if strength and conditioning is an applied discipline here, and you could relate it to just our sport infrastructure here of how, we need coaches for these teams, and we've built in strength and conditioning to support that. But yeah, I think it is interesting that we're doubling back in a way, because you go back to, I can speak to my career, early 2000s, late 90s in the field. I feel like there was a lot of great research in the field at that time. I'm thinking, I'm from the Northeast, I went to Springfield College, and UConn was right down the road. And I mean, Dr. Kramer was putting out so much, great research. That's the first time I've ever heard of, undulating or nonlinear periodization, which really fueled a lot of the training that we're doing today, right? These flexible training models, fluid periodization, there's a million different ways to say it. In a lot of these theoretical concepts, maybe we're ahead of their time. We were talking about explosive power back then. Hey, we know strength's important, but how are we training for power and athleticism? But maybe we didn't have all the tech tools that we have right now, the VBT and the force plates that we could travel with to be measuring power like we are. And now we can really focus on those areas. So I don't think that necessarily science is coming in last. I think it's been there. I think tech's caught up, and a new generation's getting to test out all these new toys. And I think some of us that have been around a few years, it's important that we carry forward, some of the great research and information that was around at that time.
I was just going to say it's because everyone wanted to save the best for last, but
yeah.
I tell you what was interesting. I was at the, I'll be dating myself, 1979 NSCA convention when it was in Chicago. It was at the O'Hara Hilton. And so it was a sort of a joint venture. The national convention that year was the NSCA did it in conjunction with the Physician and Sports Medicine magazine. So you had an equal number of researchers lecturing as you had strength coaches. Might have been a little bit too much for the audience at that particular time, but you had the top at that, you had the top exercise researchers, at that particular time. And it was very interesting. And I still have my notes from it, but it's, I think to your point, Dr. Kramer's work, really, helped the profession a lot. And I think now you just have more, research to help give affirmation to the exercise prescriptions that people are following.
For sure. And you bring up a good point about the sports medicine connection. And I think we were very, process focused. I went to Springfield College. It's a great strength coach hub. We got a great network out there, and So we have a lot of these field conversations of like, hey, when you get your head strength coach job, or when you're running a team, you have to have a good relationship with the head coach. What does that look like? How do you initiate the tough conversations? Another part of that is your relationship with athletic trainers. And that's something we focused on a lot in professional baseball, because when you're out there at the affiliate in minor league baseball, you're the performance team. It's grown a lot since when I started, but I was in Helena, Montana, and it was me and one athletic trainer, and we were, like he was my assistant, I was his assistant, and we would take any help we could get. And, but I remember at that time I was with the Milwaukee Brewers. We were all under the umbrella of the medical staff, and we went to this, they flew us down to Scottsdale one off season, and I was like back at school, and I was teaching, but I remember it was the first week of classes, and I got out of my first orientation one and just class, because I was like, well, I'm not going to miss this trip to Scottsdale. I gotta do this. And it was great. They put us up with our trainers in like hotel rooms, and brought us to this conference center, and all the team docs were there, all the athletic trainers, all the consultants we worked with. In a major league team, when you look at all the affiliates across the country, and then you bring in all the medical people that have impact on those teams, there was over 100 people there, and they're all giving presentations. So I remember, there was a radiologist there. I've never been to a high level medical conference before at that point, and just hearing some of those topics, it just shows how much knowledge we have. It's really sorting through the information and the data, and being able to present it clearly. Some of those, like you said, over our head in coaching, but I don't like to discount coaches either, is that if you take some of those professionals and you put them in a weight room environment with high level athletes, that coaching science, that those hands-on, those personality traits that make coaches successful, that's a valuable part of the process that can get downplayed at times. But I actually think our program, the NSCA doing this, it actually vaults coaching science, and coaching methods under the umbrella of sports science. And I think a lot of the psychological topics, mental health, mental skills, we're seeing these at conferences a lot now. And I think that validates the point that, people realize this is very important to the success of athletes, and that you could have all the physiology and biomechanics in check and really be missing a big piece of the puzzle if you're not communicating things the right way. And so I know that was a long tangent off the medical side, but it really brought me back to those early baseball days.
I love hearing how both you and Dr. Ted have reminisced a little bit. Obviously it helps explain why you are the professionals that you are. Eric, you said something in there that stood out to me, and you said the research that was coming out in the early 2000s, some of it was way ahead of its time. So my question for you and everyone in the room would be, what research is coming out right now that is ahead of its time in the sports performance and management space?
I might have to turn this one over to Pat first. I need some time to think about this one. No, this is, I can get this going. So we got one thing that I've seen. So if you open up the Essentials of Strength and Conditioning textbook, there's 4 or 5 physiology chapters, and there's 1 biomechanics chapter. Baseball is a perfect example, and I think we're seeing this in other pro sports as well, where biomechanist roles are significantly on the rise. We're seeing a lot of motion capture technologies that are making their way. And it's a lot better than it used to be, where you'd look like the video game all plugged up with a million little dots and sensors all over your body. It's pretty intuitive, and and that's even extended to some of the velocity based training that we're doing with, products that use 3D cameras versus cords and other things. So I think, 3D modeling, AI, it starts to get into the AI conversation of, maybe what you could do with injury prevention, with some of the twinning concepts that are out there on the tech side. But biomechanics, I would say, is probably the biggest growth area directly connected to strength and conditioning that I'm seeing, that maybe we're getting there in technology because we're starting to see it. But I think there's going to be a lot of, I think biomechanics in 5-10 years is really going to change how we look at training. And the example I give to that is, we all know how, we were all grad students, right? Like, we all know how, like, you can't do all the research you do on grad students in colleges and get muscle biopsies on your $1 million athletes, but you can watch them move. And if you take it to a monitoring perspective and you get that information in game, it completely changes how we look at testing in a way. If you're getting constant information all the time, it really is how much information can you process and handle and funnel into your equation. So I think the data side too, of just getting people that know how to funnel data in an efficient way, that'd be the areas that I think we're ahead of our time right now.
Yeah. Eric, and I love the way you and Ted were going back and forth. Things may have been different, a little different back then, but also you said ahead of its time. People were working together in the circles that you were in. There was some collaboration that was happening. At some point, at least there's a perception that maybe we kind of got away from that. And I don't know exactly how to frame this question. But what do you see where we are now with that versus where you think we're going?
Yeah. I think of the extremes, right? Like, when I can open up my phone and call some coaches that have been around for a long time, and they're great conversations. And the one thing that always comes up is, it always goes back to these foundational principles, right? That these, I think we can all go back to Boyd Epley's, 10 bullet point lists, that we all know those, and it's something that has really paved the way for our field. And when I think of those concepts, if that's what you're basing your program on, it's really a foundational approach to training. It's something that is going to work for, a large majority of the people we work with. And I can say that even at the Major League Baseball level, where not everybody is the fastest sprinter in the world in MLB, or they're extremely skilled, they're extremely talented. But in terms of the raw athletic skills that we see maybe in single Olympic events, or, in endurance or power or jumping ability, these aren't the outliers in that way. And so you still rely, even college football, you still rely on foundational training principles a lot. I think where the other way to look at it is, another term that got thrown around kind of mid-early 2000s was, okay, sports specific training. It was kind of the follow-up to train movements, not muscles, and so just thinking this forward, now it's more of an integrative or integrated approach to training, where there's this direct connection to what's going on the field of, we're getting, and a good example of that would be how much better we are with frontal plane movements than we used to be, and rotational movements. And just because we have the tech to be able to measure them, even Kaiser's run around forever, and that was a good example of, we started training rotation and now we have more capability in that way. And I think the baseball world really does a lot with that, and being able to measure, the flight of the ball and trunk mechanics. And now we're looking at, movement movement of the scapula, through different arm angles. And there's so much of a deeper dive there. So I think when you're looking at those integrative approaches, when you're really taking it to the scientific level, we just need to make sure that we're still representing the foundational principles that are like overload, that we're making sure that we're still making the athlete better, that we're not just making it complicated and changing it all the time. Because if we lose those foundational principles, what we're going to see is athletes we're going to have to double back again, and okay, now it's back to strength, push, pull, squat, hinge, here we go. And we've seen these, the pendulum swings each way. And I think the way to do this right is you have to take those foundational principles with us as we get more technological, or else we're going to have to revisit them.
Oh, Eric, since your background in baseball, and we look at the technology that's that baseball has now in terms of the TrackMan and all sorts of stuff with the analysis that they're using at some of the youth baseball combines. In your position as a professional that's working in baseball, how would you integrate some of those those technologies in terms of money evaluation, and in terms of how would that assist you in maybe some of your programming?
Yeah. So I think there's very complicated answers to that question, and you could really lay out an in-depth model. But when you're talking about how do you do that with from the ground up, how do you do that with a population that we're not doing any tech, like what do you start with? And I think from a professional standpoint, like a coach, I always say, what do you have access to? You could get some really good information from a jump mat that's just collecting dust in the corner, as long as it still works, and you go in and use some of the equations to be able to calculate power and different things there. I think one thing we see in the professional side is we are looking, you look at all the stat casts and we look at the biomechanics, we're either looking at movement or we're looking at workload. But up until the major leagues, but kind of between when they first get drafted and they're at the complexes where you have a lot of control and you can put a GPS on those players, to the major leagues where you can't do the GPS and that, but you have TrackMan and you have all the motion capture built into the stadium. Well, what about all those years, maybe 4 or 5, sometimes longer years in between, when you're hustling the minor leagues and the conditions aren't as favorable? So I think the best way to look at that is, and especially with youth or college, is, make it mobile, make it have some mobile options that you can take with you, and you're going to extrapolate meaning and data from whatever you're measuring. So if you're fortunate and you have a force plate that you can pull into the weight room, because that's a great place, you can always integrate a few jumps into a weight room session and get consistent data there. It doesn't have to be just a dedicated, okay, we're just testing today. I think you do the same with VBT. Every time you're getting information, it's, you can use that. And so I think it was Vern Gambetta, every workout's a test, every test is a workout. At least that's who I credit that one to. I think some of these quotes get passed around generation. And so that's the way I look at it, is you want to empower yourself with information to make decisions on the fly. And there's always going to be someone with a higher resource program that has the access to better information. But I think one thing, we will take information that maybe isn't ideal, or if there's a consistent bias to a set of data that we're using, and we understand that bias, that data could still be valuable to us. So I think that's the real world that maybe doesn't happen when you're trying to publish papers and things like that. But that's how I look at it.
Again, great insight. And you talked about a little bit about the technology that's being implemented in the field of play. And you also talked about training and how how it's designed to transfer into performance. Now, with the way that technology is becoming more and more accessible and cheaper, how far away are we from a point when field testing in the training environment doesn't happen anymore, and the only physical performance testing will happen with this technology during participation of the actual sport?
I have that exact same question. I've never, and sometimes you have these ideas and you think like, maybe I'm off because I don't hear anybody talking about this. But I hear, COVID-19 was coming around, was starting up, and we got into some conversations with different organizations related to, hey, what are we going to tell coaches and athletes how to do? One of the big conversations that came up was conditioning tests. Okay. Sure. It's like traditional, it's like lore in our field. Like when athletes show up, they need to do that conditioning test to see if they're ready. Well, I think COVID-19 is a good example of maybe where we should, think a little bigger picture about what the status of these athletes are, the status of where they were training, the access to just open space to run and move around. And maybe we have to make an adjustment in some of our programs, because than what we've done, because this is an unprecedented event for us. And so it really does get me thinking of, what about a ground up approach to collecting data and information where you're just onboarding your athlete, which is an overlooked process that many of us don't do. We just get them and start working with them, and we get what we can get. But the process of onboarding becomes important when you have to train them on the iPad or the tech, or how to, it's not just a squat rack anymore. They can figure that one out for the most part. But when you're integrating 2-3 tech devices throughout a workout, and the athlete has to press the button or else we don't get data, or you need a coach to be in the right position, it gets more complicated. And so I do see that as a viable option of, if you're getting enough information from monitoring, and if your view of monitoring extends to the weight room and the practice environment, maybe testing becomes obsolete in some of those scenarios. But that doesn't mean it couldn't be employed, if that's the only way you have to get the information, because I think we all know from practical experience, if I'm trying to get all these players through a 30-yard sprint, I don't want to do it on 30 different days. So, we're going to knock this out. But that's a good question.
Eric, I have a question directed at my old school coaches, the ones that profess they are old school. They are about the foundation. They are about the whatever they learned, and maybe some of this technology stuff is they don't need it. And I'm going to ask it in terms of the CPSS, the Certified Performance in Sports Scientist certification. Do you think this is going to have an impact? How do you think it's going to have an impact on our profession? The older strength coaches versus the younger strength coaches?
I mean, I got nothing but respect for guys and girls that have been in our field for a long time, because we wouldn't be here without the contributions they've made. But one thing I'll go back to saying, the majority of people are going to make gains off those foundational principles. We still have a lot of foundational work to do in the high school space. In the majority of the college space, we're working with those principles a lot of the time. We have, strength and conditioning training, it becomes a recruiting tool, and there's some pretty cool facilities out there, and we can flash some tech and things like that. But I don't think it makes the old school strength coach obsolete in any way. I think you need to have those foundational principles represented across your program. There's a reason they've stood the test of time. There's a reason there's an entire field and thousands of certificates and coaches that have built careers on those principles. With that said, I think we've all known this. You have to keep an open mind to what's new. You have to consider that there might be some easier ways to get him, and I think the most logical extension of that, where we know we're doing better today, is we're just getting a lot more information. And if tech is tough, we're also better leaders now today, I think, than we were, where we know, like, bring someone in that can help me with the tech or help me with the direction that the program's going to go. And we see that. So I think it goes into staff development a little bit, but for a long time, and especially working in the minor leagues where you have to be very resourceful, sometimes that best workout you can do is just a simple 4 or 5 movements. And you're just trying to make it, hey, if I can't be heavy, I'm at least going to be fast and athletic, or hey, this is the one time I can get under the bar and do it. We're going to do that if the athlete's ready. And so I think those are pretty simple when you're in some of those environments. But yeah, when you have a lot more options at your disposal, you still sticking to the basics can be tough, I think. Did I answer you? Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, that was good. I'll ask a follow-up question. For younger professionals, interns, graduate assistants, what is your pitch to them to pursue the CPSS?
Yeah, so I've always been one of those professionals. I'm like, always be exploring your interests in the field. And because I felt like when I got into baseball, that was one of the many ways I could go at the time, but I felt like there was an immense need for professionalism in the game, and just quality coaching. And so I think young coaches should always be looking towards where opportunities are. And if you want to be a head strength coach of a program, you can do that, and there'll probably be some tech involved, and you might be sort of the hybrid sports scientist or whatever. There's always going to be multi-sport roles, but there's additional roles today, and you can make more choices in the performance analytics side of things, overseeing the technology and information, biomechanics, like I was talking about. There's a lot of different types of roles, even the role, and I can speak to it from the NSCA, of like project management. When you're talking sports science, it becomes a research study in a way. So you're actually like managing a research question and bringing all the data back to that, so you're reporting consistently on that. Maybe this is an area we still need to improve quite a bit, but project manager, I think, is a role on the sports science team that is pretty vital to the process. And maybe that's experience wise, maybe that is sort of a hybrid of somebody that can really connect the research, but their job is to connect it. So they have to have that applied coaching side of it as well.
Eric, so we're talking about young strength coaches, and we're talking about hybrid roles, but we're also talking about how you have over 100 applications for the CPSS. And I'm hopeful that there will be a wave of new positions that are purely sports science.
I agree.
In your experience, and among the people you've spoken to in your network, how does the bona fide sports scientist come in and be successful with the other disciplines?
That's a great question. And I had someone ask me similarly, hey, I'm a professor. I have my PhD, and this is a sports scientist in their own right. They're doing this, and they don't need 4 letters to say they're a sports scientist. So what's the value to them? And to me, it's, not every strength coach is going to be a CPSS, not every athletic trainer, not every professor, not every kinesiology or exercise science professor. To me, it's dedicated towards those that are taking the applied sports science field forward. So getting out of the classroom and the on-campus laboratory and really engaging in the team environment. So I actually see it as a credibility builder in a way for those who have substantial knowledge in that laboratory setting, in the academic space, to go back and be practitioners, and there's a lot of great, there's a lot of smart people out there that are great practitioners as well. But I think there is a need we're kind of bridging the gap from both sides. Coaches are going to upskill to be qualified for this. The tech space is going to come in and play a role. But I think, it goes back to that, we validate the coaching science in a way with this program, but we don't get away from the core, the hard sciences that are the foundation. And I'll speak to the exam a little bit. The exam is largely case study based. And a lot of those case studies are based on actual research articles and being able to dissect and understand and make logical conclusions from real research coming out of the JSCR. And so that that process, those with advanced education, those that have been through PhD programs or high-level master's programs with a lot of research, are going to be very well suited to lead these initiatives. And I don't think this doesn't take away from education. I think, like any certification, it is just that. And then there is education, and then there's experience and all the other factors as well. So I really think everybody's got a place in this. It's the goal is to bring that common language together so that everybody can work a little more cohesively.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric.
You got it.
Ted, you got a question? You're thinking of one, I can tell.
Well, I just think, in today's marketplace, anything you can do to make yourself more marketable is well worth the time and effort. And it just gives you, a greater skill set. And if you look at, the trend that's occurring in the athletic departments, well, we want to add this position. Do you think you could take over this position? Oh, absolutely. So, I think really, Eric's points are well taken. You're making an investment in yourself because you're improving your skill set as a professional.
So I'll jump in with a little something about this. One thing I say a lot is that, a certification isn't worth anything if there's not a strong curriculum that it's based on. And while the certification being accredited represents all the disciplines and the entire field of sports science, the NSCA is also putting together a number of educational resources, and we're all in on this thing. The textbook is, how we do our textbooks, this is just the first one. It's like, I'll get people calling like, hey, what's the second version of the second edition textbook? Like, those conversations are always ongoing. So that's part of it. Getting them ingrained in, we had 35 current book adoptions, at colleges and universities. So these are subjects being, and that's in the first year. I don't think you typically expect that. So, and we're coming up on the season where we're going to start looking at that for new courses for 2023. And so I'm encouraged by the fact that people are craving this information. And, I've had some tougher conversations with, maybe a few longtime coaches, and it's not something that like we all get our degrees and, we're exposed to different things, right? Well, there is an education requirement to this. And if you've never had any real exercise science, but maybe you've been a great strength coach or a great practitioner for a long time, that doesn't mean you're that far off. But there is a requirement to have at least, we have a 146 type requirement where you need one course in at least 4 of the 6 core areas as a minimum requirement to sit for it. And that's just kind of the baseline. And then it's got a little bit of a gut check. Do I want to take those classes just to get this? But I'm like, you know what, this information is going to be valuable to you in your role as a strength coach, in your role, whatever your role is in this field. It's largely about the information that's going to be taken forward from this, and the certification program will grow. We have to build this program keeping in mind that this is for generations to come as well. And I think we've all kind of seen some of those progressions that have happened with ATCs and PTs and how requirements, affect different people at different stages. So, but I really pay attention to the education side of it, because I think as soon as this thing launches, that's where I'm going to spend all my time, really taking this forward to get the content out there, and then the employer side of it as well. That's something I think we at the NSCA can do even a better job of, is making, like you said, Ernie, like what does that dedicated role look like? I know, Pat, we've talked about job descriptions in sports science. It's like, who do you hire? What's a sports scientist? Who can lead a program, and then what are the other sub roles underneath it to make it work? So I think that's where we're headed. And that's an example of what we've learned from CSCS and the other programs we had that have gotten us here. Pat, I want to ask you something. You got a program at Louisville. You've got some directors under you in different areas. And you recently kicked off sort of a collaboration with your university hospital and your sports science in your athletic department through sports science. What are some of the challenges in just getting a position launched, figuring out what it was going to be, and then where do you're building a department? What are your next steps?
Great question. Well, we've hired someone, and he's doing a pretty good job, I would say. Yeah. So we hired Dr. Ernie Reimer as our director of sports science. And this role originally was going to be just an athletic department venture. And the pandemic allowed for some extended conversations to happen outside of the athletics department. So we were able to have conversations with our HSS department, our health and sports sciences department, on campus academic department, our university hospital system, U of L Health. And through those conversations, we had ideas that were going back and forth. And that's a partnership was formed through those relationships where we would collaborate to create this position of a director of sports science department, not just a position, but a full department. So, and I was advised by several people like yourself, Dr. Reimer, Dr. Brian Mann, several others, Dr. Ted Lambrinides, several others, Javar Gillette, about what makes up sports science, what would make up a full department. And that idea excited a lot of people. It excited our academic department because they could see pathways to research. They could see opportunities to collect and use data. Athletics saw the opportunity to utilize graduate students and interns and seasonal assistants. The U of L Health system saw the opportunity to get more involved with campus and athletics and work on this comprehensive integrated model of human development and human performance. So just having those conversations over a good period of time and building those relationships with the key stakeholders allowed us to form an idea that people would feel comfortable signing off on. So it has not been easy, but I would also say it hasn't been overly difficult. We have some really good people that were committed to working together, collaborating, and, you know, destroying silos and just looking to do something special. And I think that the way you communicate with people, the way you build relationships will allow you to go further on any joint venture. You have to have trust. There has to be communication. You have to build a relationship with people. And, you know, if you don't build that relationship, it leads to resentment and rebellion. And we don't want that. We want people to work together, to feel that they can contribute. And this is something that they want to be a part of. So far, so good. Egos and insecurities, you have to address those because they exist. We all have them, and we have to be aware of those. Those are kind of like our biases that we bring to certain situations. As researchers, we have to acknowledge those and ourselves and in the research. It's the same way with us as people when we're interacting with each other. If we want to accomplish something greater than ourselves, then we have to understand that goal, mission, and vision has to be the driving force. And I think that's what we have here. And I know that's what we have. And I think we're going to go pretty far with it.
That's awesome. Ernie, I want to, you got the clean slate now. You got this like shiny new department. You got a lot of resources. You got Pat laying it out, but coming in from Utah, in your experience there, you know, how did that prepare you, and kind of what's the landscape of getting your feet wet in this role?
For sure. I mean, I think that Utah was kind of a rough draft for me. And when I went in from the US ski team, I was a strength conditioning specialist that was hired by the sports science department, which that name of that department changed. But then I decided I want to make a transformation into becoming just a sports scientist, and going from like just having to figure out what is sports science, how do you do it, how does it fit in this environment. And I got to do that for 8 years and figured that out. And at Utah, it was like, hey, Ernie, we'd like to offer you a job. Here's your title. Can you write us a job description? Sure, got to do that. And it was like, here's the athletics department. It's your playground. Make us better. And so I get to take that and those experiences, trying to collaborate with academia and trying to get grant funding, trying to publish some research, and working through all those challenges and understanding how the practitioners feel about some of those things. And then I show up here and they're like, here's the athletics department. Make it your playground. Oh, there's an entire hospital. Go for it, man. Keep our athletes healthier. Oh, by the way, here's an entire university. And here's a list of people that we've met, and we'd like you to go meet them. Make the university your playground, and see that city right there? Make that community your playground. And it's just been so much fun over these past 2.5 months, being able to explore a much bigger playground and having the support from above, where anytime I'm just charging along, I have the machetes, I'm just hacking my way through the jungle, and I run into something, I can call Pat, hey, I bumped into this. How am I supposed to handle this? He'll give me just the amount of information I need to go and handle it. And I can do that with a number of different people. It's been outstanding. We've made rapid progress. So the 8 years of institutional knowledge that I gained in learning how to build a sports science and create a sports science program in a major university, thanks to Pat's leadership and others' leadership, I've been able to fast track that learning curve to gain the institutional knowledge I need to really try to help everyone else just blow this thing up. And so far it's been awesome. And I think there's a promising future ahead of us for this model.
Ernie, they haven't had you work with those athletes at Churchill Downs, have they?
It might happen. It might just happen.
One thing that really hasn't changed from the old school early strength coach days to today, and you talk about your playground, we got to be careful because my kids just got home, and if they think I'm talking about playground, they're going to want me to jump off the call here. But one thing that hasn't changed is that we've had to build value for ourselves in this profession every step of the way. You go back to the Boyd Epley story, where if he made those athletes slower, he was going to get fired, and you have to build value with what you have access to and what you can do. And the resources that you have available, that's a huge part of it, but the processes are important too. And I want to serve this one up there. You guys are a major university. You've integrated the health system now. And I think you see these verticals, right? You see, okay, we got sports medicine, we got strength and conditioning or sports performance. And then now we have this new sports science. What are some of the horizontals kind of connecting the dots between there, and how is that process being facilitated? Because that goes back to all the communication stuff. What are you guys working on?
Well, that's an interesting one. The communication, how we're making it happen. I would say the pandemic probably allowed us to be the communicators we say we wanted to be. We went digital, we went to Zoom calls, then we went to Microsoft Teams. There were a lot of meetings happening. So we have still stayed with the hybrid model. Our health and performance meetings have grown in terms of who is actually on that call. We meet once a week. We have the sports, we have so obviously sports medicine, sports science, sports nutrition, mental health, mental performance, team physicians. We also have facilities, equipment, student athlete development, housing, and I'm sure I'm missing someone on our weekly health and performance calls. Academics as well is represented. So the entire student athlete experience is represented on our weekly health and performance calls. And everyone has a chance to speak, contribute, ask questions, answer questions, and collaborate. And I think it's been, when Ernie talks about the playground, it has become our playground to communicate. When I first arrived here, we met in person once a month, and it was just difficult logistically, parking and people having to leave a training room, leaving athletes, leaving a weight room. Now we have the ability for people just to hop in their office if they're driving in their car, and can still, we can still work together. We can still make progress. So, Ernie, what would you say? What's been your experience with that since you've been here?
It's been really good. And we're talking about playgrounds. And I think what we're talking about is playing nicely in the same playground. And that's really important. And I think that we've done a good job so far. What's really been interesting for me is just the opportunity to go around, to meet, to ask questions, and just to listen. Because when you step into each little area within the athletics department, but when you start to talk to professors and faculty, when you talk to the graduate school office, the Office of Research and Innovation, when you go to the healthcare system and talk to them, you start to learn when you just shut up and listen for a minute, you start to learn what's important to them. And if you can just resonate with that for a minute and just take that in, you become a better person, a better colleague for those people because you get them better. It's not your agenda, it's theirs. And that, I think, will be one of the greatest challenges that we face with the sports science network at our institution, is constantly paying close attention to what every stakeholder's true initiatives are, and trying to find ways to facilitate opportunities to help as many people come as close to those goals as possible. Because I think that's what happens when everyone's in the same playground. I think we forget that those colleagues next to me have slightly different goals than what we do. And when we become selfish with our goals, then you start to create rifts. And we're not playing so nicely in the playground anymore. So for me, as I'm going around, that's probably been the most eye-opening thing for me, because my position is really unique. Most sports jobs, you go in and they say, we want you to hit the ground running. You're 2 weeks late. For me, they just said, you know what? We want you to take the next 3 months, maybe even a year, to figure out how to get closer to our vision. And so I've been able to slow down and listen and just kind of circulate. And it's been really eye-opening for me to just know what's important to different people and try to serve that need.
Powerful. I think, we preach communication, right, in this field. But if you get hired into a assistant strength coach role or a strength coach role, yeah, you need to advocate for your program and find resources and all these different things. And those tend to be very channeled conversations of bringing it right back to the weight room. And so you need to communicate well in your weight room setting. But now this isn't just a swing set anymore. We're talking about the full blown playground, just to kind of keep that analogy going here. But it's like this thing. I mean, we're getting almost a theme park now. Like we've got to be able, and when you go to different areas, they are really different conversations. And that, I liked what Pat said, we're getting to be the communicators that maybe we always hoped we'd be, just because we've had to be more resourceful. And it talks about talking about the tech, the first and foremost thing that any tech tool we implement, it's typically a communication tool. What good's a force plate if there's no visual feedback to tell you what numbers are being collected, or what good's a linear encoder if you don't have an iPad to tell you how fast you're going? It's a communication tool, feedback, and that relates to the athlete, but I think it speaks to the coaching process as well. Ted, you've been in a lot of these roles. What do how do you relate kind of communication where things are at today, and just from what you've seen?
I like what Ernie said. You've got to sit down with all the stakeholders at one time, and listen twice as much as you say, before you start to implement stuff. So I think that's just the reoccurring theme. Communication, but the communication starts with listening first and figuring out what their vision is, and then figuring out what your vision is going to be, but messaging it such that they feel it's their vision. So it's
but there's got to be a benefit for everybody. There's got to be, it can't be performance at the expense of health, or
correct,
sports science at the expense of, mental wear and tear on the athletes, that kind of thing. So you're right. I agree. But, and we talk about framing things up so that they're communicated the right way, but really it comes back to everybody seeing value in what we're doing.
Yeah. And I think, and obviously I think part of those stakeholders are the athletes themselves. have got to be part of that conversation when you start stuff.
Absolutely.
It wasn't like that 20 years ago, but it's like that today.
Yeah, I agree. I was just seeing something the NCAA is adding student representation on some of their committees for,
Yeah.
which is pretty unprecedented, just given, some of the history. And I think that's a positive step, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Eric, I just want to congratulate you on the amazing job you've done there at the NSCA. I hope in a few years' time that I'll be in your chair, having had the positive effect on this community like you have for the whole nation and even internationally. But I just have to go back to the beginning and ask you a really important question. Like, what must that have been like for you to go in there and have to fill Scott Caulfield's sleeves?
Well, I mean, some jobs you just know you're not gonna, you're just not gonna, I should say some shirts you're just not gonna fill. I fill most of the shirt. It's just the sleeves that I don't really fill. And I won't pick on Scott too much, but no, it's I've actually really enjoyed working at the NSCA. I've said this before. It's really a dream job for me to be able to do this, talk shop, connect with coaches, get on the phone every day and hear what's going on, whether it's the most technical conversation that we could have, or just, hey, like, what do what's your block zero look like with, with athletes who've never lifted before? It's like, I love talking strength and conditioning. I'm always continuing to learn in this field. I'm doing a little less on the floor coaching than maybe I've ever done, but it's been very rewarding to still support the coaching community and just have have the reach that I've had, because I feel like it's about giving people opportunities and supporting people. The NSCA isn't the 50 people here working in Colorado Springs. It's everyone on this call. It's everyone out there certified by us, members, people attending our events. We rely on all of you a lot. We're a volunteer driven organization. Some people maybe don't realize how much volunteerism is a part of this. And so with that, if you want to get involved, please reach out. Tune into the show notes. We'll make sure you get that contact, but there's a lot of opportunities. And but I got to give Scott credit too. He's, he had this job for about 10 years before me. He's how I knew this job existed. And just so happens we're both from Vermont, so I had to pull in some old favors, but you know how it goes.
Well, you're doing a great job. Appreciate you and what you have done for the profession. Like Ernie said, appreciate you being on this podcast. Ernie and Ted, thank you for co-hosting this. It went very well. Good job, Dr. Reimer. You brought it. And that'll be all. Eric, I think we'll wrap it up. And we really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks, guys.
Great job.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Eric. Thanks,
Keep
everyone.
up the great work.
Thank you.